Everyone around the county knew about his exploits, so it really is Cobleskill. If you knew Cobleskill, you knew about
Okay.
John Miscoy, and so that's why it's important.
Okay.
And I think newer people don't know much about it. Okay, so.
And he was military governor of the Philippines,
Of one island.
of what island, and I don't know what island it was. But they lived in Baguio. And while they were there, Aunt Nellie, he married Nellie Kellogg, Nellie Kellogg, and she raised orchids up there. But while they were there, they had one child who died in infancy, and then later on they adopted a daughter of a soldier wife that died. And Olga, her name was Olga, she died when she was about 14, I think, after surgery. And during the World War II, they were in an internment camp. And they were there for quite some time, and just before they were released or liberated, Uncle Lou suffered a very severe stroke and could not walk. So they transferred him to an American hospital. And a letter that I had found among the papers that Aunt Nellie had written, she said that the American generals had been over to see Uncle Lou after he was in the American hospital. But he died very shortly after they were liberated, but he knew that they were free. And Aunt Nellie came back to the United States and went to Arizona and built a house and lived out there for quite a few years. And there she raised Siamese cats, and which I wouldn't appreciate then. But she had a regular cat boy that took care of all the cats and all. And they came home before the Second World War and were warned not to go back, but that's where they wanted to be. That was their home, and they wanted to go back, and they did go back. They lived there for years, and they were very, very, very happy there. He was. I have a picture of him as a cadet. I couldn't find. I know there are loads of other pictures, but I couldn't find him. And after the little girl died, why, they never had any more children. But the Army was his life.
Okay, so will you tell us then or what you know about Charles Shaver?
Charles, he was born in Guilderland on December 25th, 1827, and he came to Schoharie County with his family, and he first worked up in Hinesville with Philip Hilton, who ran a general store, and they later became partners. In 1855, he came to Cobleskill, and went in partnership with a Martin Watson in a store called the Dwelling Store, D-W-E-L-L-I-N-G, Dwelling Store, and the store, it was on Main Street, just east of the United States Hotel. Well, that partnership broke up after a year, and then Mr. Shaver bought out the hardware business of Colonel Alonzo Ferguson, and Colonel Alonzo Ferguson started the first hardware business in Cobleskill, and the store was located on Grand Street where the Dr. David Baird house is now. And Mr. Shaver was in business with him, and incidentally, Grand Street was called Lunenburg Turnpike, then Vernon Street, and then Grand Street. And the same year that he bought out the Colonel Ferguson's hardware store, he bought the house for his family, where Louis Dumont now lives. And in 1864, Mr. Shaver and Mr. Carter erected the brick block on the corner, the black bank block, and it extended up to where the Boris hardware store. But not right there, because he had to buy land from the man that owned the Sternberg, who owned the First National Hotel, to get the hardware store. But with the bank, after they erected the brick bank, the bank was in there, and Mr. Carter and Mr. Shaver were on the board of directors, and at one time Mr. Shaver was president of the bank. And in 1864, he, after buying a hardware business from Mr. Ferguson, he moved it from Grand Street to Main Street, where the Boris Shaver hardware store. And he was in business from 1864 to 1892. And that's when he sold it to Irving Van Boris, who was employed there. And that was the hardware store right up until this demise. A couple of your friends in Brewers sold it out. And he also started the first coal business in Cobleskill when, after the D&H Railroad went through, then he was started the first coal business in Cobleskill. He died. He married in 1850. He married Selina Hines, and they had 5 children. And he died in 1898. She died in 1918. And on her 80th birthday, her daughter Frances, who married Jonathan Squake, and Arden's mother, wrote a paper to be read at her on her 80th birthday. And it says, and she said on this, I think is interesting. I used to sit on the little gate which had pickets on, and upon which you couldn't climb, but the big swing gate, through which the horses drove in, as we were forbidden over and over again swinging on the gate. It was, of course, more of a pleasure than ever. I know I never failed about sundown to be roosting upon the top rail when the stage drove in. The post office was in the basement of what is now Dr. Ohlendorf's house. That would be the house right across from the Duma house. And so you can see what an unobstructed view I had of the event of the day. No steam car or trolley car or any other modern mode of travel had ever seemed quite like the majesty of that stage driver perched on that high seat, cracking his whip and driving a 4-horse team attached to a coach exactly like the one you have all seen in Wild West shows. I remember I was perched down the same old gate when Lincoln was running for president and watched the torchlight procession march by. It was such a regret to me that my father was a wide awake and marched in the procession with a black cape on, while every other little girl's father belonged to the then popular Democratic Party and marched in the jubilant procession of little giants with their flaming yellow capes. So that's the end of that. And Mr. Carter and Mr. Shaver, I think, were 2 of the prominent real businessmen of really starting Cobleskill.
I talk about then, you wanted to repeat that on the harder and...
Well, that was they call that the Cobleskill Agriculture Works, I think, and the Harders started it down there. They used to make not threshers, but I don't know, some kind of garden material. I don't know what they were. Plows, would they be?
I don't remember.
I don't know.
Empy Agriculture Works, the first threshing machine, I think.
Oh, first threshing machine. Okay.
That was Empy long before Harder was there.
Well, and the Harders did buy it, and they were down here before they went down on MacArthur Avenue. Or
Yeah.
Railroad, it used to be Railroad Avenue when I came to town.
Was water power important?
Well,
factor?
they used the creek, did they, or didn't they have water?
Not Harder, they had a smokestack, had a
Oh.
furnace down there. The Empy Agriculture Works used the water power.
Well, tell them about the time you saw them take the smokestack down.
Well, why was that? I mean, they didn't excited about that. They just took a few bricks at a time and put some sticks in and built a fire, and when the fire burned the sticks down,
The smokestack came
the
down?
smokestack came down. There were a lot of bricks we had to pick up. I was small enough to have to help a little bit.
Well, the park was all part of, well, Margaret Golding, the park was named for Margaret Golding, but the village bought that land from Mother Norton. And all the park and all the building was, Margaret Golding doesn't give that to the village. But I think she put an addition on the one building for the pool tables. And I think Mr. Iorio was the one that instigated her having it called Margaret Golding Park. But the village bought the park from Mother Norton after Dad Norton died.
Jim Schuyler. Can you tell us something about Jim Schuyler?
He worked in the hotel in New York. I was told he was a bartender down there. That's where he made his money, by getting tips over the bar. But Phil, his son, said he managed the hotel. Well, I never got into that from anybody else except the family.
There was a Congressman Kinder.
Well, he lived in 10 High Street. He lived in the house when Mother Norton was a little girl. She lived in the Van Scoik house, which is 3 houses down on Grand Street. And Congressman Pinder had a daughter, Katie, and she was Mother Norton's age. And of course they used to play back and forth, and they were friends for all their lives. And I think that Congressman Pinder lived here, and then the Pinder that we talked about in the history of Museum of Natural History, I think they must have been brothers. I haven't anything to prove that, but, and they lived over at Beekman's Corners. And their daughter Madge married Ken Johnson, for his first wife. But I think Dad Norton bought the house from Congressman Pinder, did he, Art?
I don't know.
I don't know either. I never heard.
Movies they had, how much it cost.
Bill Hart was the main character, the Westerner, for the cowboy pictures, I remember.
Tell them the prices of how much it cost.
5 and 10 cents. Then they jumped to 7 and 11. Where it was on Main Street is hard. I can't pick out the spot now.
Was it on
Well, it was on the,
Hoagland side?
yes.
Oh.
Did they have a piano player, and was it a silent
Oh,
movie?
yes, it was silent.
Definitely silent.
Yeah.
And it just had a piano player.
Oh, you know the name of the piano player?
Well, Dorothy Satriel used to play the piano there, and Mrs. Earl Sherwood used to play the piano. I remember them telling me that. But the movie house was gone when I came here. That must have been where Borlang's Market and, what was the other store that was there?
I can't picture them.
Oh, Clark's store. Clark used to have a store there, like 5 and 10.
Yes, he was on
And
Main
I
Street.
just have a surmise that that's where that movie theater might have been. But I don't know. Those doors were there when I came here.
Where were the Florios?
On the
located?
corner of Division Street in Maine.
What kind of store?
Same thing, he always did have ice cream and peanuts, and he had a peanut machine out on the main street, popcorn I should say, out on the main street for weekends.
Well, where was the sweet shop? Was that?
Well, that was way down this way.
Oh, I've heard someone
That
talk
was-
about that. I don't know
that
anything
was-
about it. Oh, Nick Panis.
It was-
Yeah, Nick Panis had he was here when I came. In Holman's drugstore.
Here.
Yeah, just like everybody did. They didn't have anybody entertain them all the while like they do now.
Well, they used to go swimming.
Yes,
Whereabouts?
up the main Cobleskill Creek, it's the only place we had to swim. Up behind the factory.
Behind the where?
The factory, the only
Oh,
factory in
oh.
town, as far as I know. Big Sandy and Little Sandy. And then they did come down the creek and swim down below that's Florence Street, but it wasn't very pleasant because all the apple came from the apple cider factory, would come down and float down the stream. You had to push them out of the way if you wanted to swim.
Who owned the apple factory?
Cider factory it was.
Cider factory. Who owned that?
Fredericks?
Frederick,
Will Fredericks?
Little Frederick, that's right.
How about your fishing holes? You have a favorite fishing hole or a place?
No, I went to Schuyler's Lake most of the time. And some people were smart enough to catch trout right in our Mill Creek here, but I wasn't quite that clever.
You were saying the creek didn't always run down this way. Where did it go?
Down over where what's the damn big store?
Grand Union?
Grand Union. Down in I was a swamp. But that's a long way. That's just hearsay. I never saw it that way.
Well, didn't Uncle John say that Legion Drive was all very swampy all down there? So Legion Drive where they built all those homes. I
Yes,
remember
yeah.
when they first built those homes, after they built the homes, people were complaining that their cellars were always full of water and all.
Yeah.
And I think they were discussing it once up at the house or something, and Uncle John said, well, all that was a swamp down there. That's where the creek used to go.
Oh, I can remember it was a swamp. I can remember that. Before they built anything there. The meat man had a farm up where start up the hill where the motel is, but it was on the lower part of that hill.
Yeah, and I can't.
Plebenek.
Hmm?
Plebenek or something
Plebenek,
like that.
yes, I remember hearing that. So, where
Legion Drive, yes.
Legion Drive, wasn't that the Van Dusen farm?
It was.
I knew it was a good sized farm. That's where Linda Finn lived. Trying to think or Linda Van Dusen. Well, that was what's Jim Van Dusen's father's name?
I don't know, there were 2 or 3 of them.
Well, anyway, it was the Van Dusen farm, I know that. That's what it was, quite a big farm.
One was Jim and another was...
Morgan.
Oh, that was a son. That was Linda's brother. And their father may have been named Morgan too. I don't remember that.
Can you tell us who lived down North Grand Street? Who some of the neighbors were on North Grand Street?
Who?
And who are some of the neighbors on North Grand Street?
Oh, I have to look up that one book of Uncle John's that walks about it. Casson Shaver, I remember that name. I don't remember him.
Where they lived?
Oh, one of those houses down about where Mrs. Way was. In recent years.
Yeah, but before that, was that where Mrs. Burhan lived?
Well, Mr. Burant's. And
Torn down when they, it was a beautiful old house. When they put the addition on, the church bought it and put it down when they could fund to put their addition on. It was a house comparable to Miss Khan's, the two old houses that really tied right in with Grand Street. And of course, Ed Higley tore Miss Khan's house down to when he remarried and built the new house. But oh, that was a beautiful house, and so was Stella Overhaugh's house. And Dow House across the street, I don't know whether Mr. Smith, who bought the hotel and named it the Hotel Augustin after himself, I don't think he built that house. That's where he lived anyway, the Dow House. And the house next door, coming up where the Propers live now, was where Mr. Corey Forrest lived, and that was Helene Dusenberry. Used to live in there, and those are the only people I can remember.
They owned where all Clinton Circle is. D.C. Dow developed that.
Oh. 5 houses here, the Pangmans.
Mary Brown house.
Well, yes, but Pangmans lived across the street, then there were no other houses after Pangmans on the other side of the street.
No.
Okay.
Well, Payment lived there. They lived in-
Millard Pangman.